I'm Lawrence Shatkin. This presentation is about a certain kind of career change that's called a sequel career. When people talk about career change, they often talk about skills, and I'm not going to minimize the importance of skills in career change. However, there's another factor that needs to be taken into account, and that is knowledge. It's possible to make a career change that doesn't throw away the knowledge that you've learned over the course of a career. Let's start by looking at what I mean by sequel. Everybody knows that sequels are very popular in the movie industry. Hollywood just loves them, and think about why this is so. The main reason is that the movie-going public knows what to expect. They may know the particular actors who are in the sequel, at least they know the setting of the sequel, and the kind of action that it involves, the kind of plot it involves. Therefore, the publicity campaign is a lot easier. The studio doesn't have to make people understand what the movie is about. And in a way, you could compare this to a career change. The skills of a movie are things like how well the acting is done, how well the screenplay is written, how good the special effects are, but these don't necessarily sell the movie. What may sell the movie is simply the knowledge of what the movie is going to involve. And there's something very similar going on when you make a career change. Yes, when you make a career change, it's vital for you to have the skills that are required for the new work role. However, you shouldn't waste the knowledge that you've acquired over the course of your previous career. So what exactly do I mean by a sequel career? It's a career that has a different use for the knowledge that you've acquired in your old job. Usually it's a different occupation, but most of the time it's in the same industry. You've learned about that industry, you have knowledge of that industry, and this is a way for you to use it. Often you use a different mix of skills, maybe a different emphasis of skills in the new occupation. Now, what do I mean by these knowledges that you bring to a sequel career? Simply you talk the language of the industry, and I mean more than just the technical terminology. You know the kinds of topics that are on people's minds, what the common problems are. You know the difference between good work and schlock work. You know what sells, what the market appreciates. You know what the marketplaces are, how it is that buyers reach sellers. You know what a typical price range is in this industry, what is gouging and what is giving away the store. You know the big players and the newcomers. You understand what the major trends are in your industry. And you also understand the industry's environment, and by that I mean the legal environment, the competitive environment, the technological environment. You know where new workers come from, what schools they come from, what backgrounds they come from, what makes a good worker. You know what the major organs of communication are, whether they're electronic, associations, print media, and you know a lot of people. You have contacts all over the industry. And everybody knows that a network of contacts is extremely important in job hunting. So this gives you an advantage when you're looking for your next job in that sequel career. You know who the employers are. And as I said earlier, you can speak the language so you know what kinds of terms to use in your resumes and cover letters, what language has clout in this industry. One of the most obvious sequel moves that people make is into management, and this is so well established as a career path that it's considered a rung on a ladder. What you do here is to manage an organization's resources, and that includes the people and the equipment and simply the amount of time that one has. I aggregated the occupations that play a managerial role, and it's no surprise that the earnings are fairly high. Managers do tend to get paid better than technicians and other kinds of workers. Growth is less than the average for most occupations, but it does have the advantage of prestige. One of the drawbacks, of course, is the stress that you work under. And then there's the famous Peter Principle, which is the idea that people sometimes get advanced to a managerial role where they don't have the competence to really handle it. So it may not be the ideal sequel move for everybody. Generally, a bachelor's degree is expected, and this is more important now than ever because of the technical tools that people use in managerial roles to manipulate the data that are needed for managerial decisions. But some people do advance into this by getting work experience, and one way to do this is to take on one small managerial task at a time. To ask your boss, for example, let me do some budgeting on the next project, or let me work out the schedule for the next project. And by taking on one task at a time and proving you can do it, you can gain credibility as a manager. Another way to gain experience is to manage in a volunteer organization of some kind. And here are the names of some managerial occupations. There's an old saying that people who can't do something teach it. The truth is that teaching takes a lot of skill, but this is one way that people can use knowledge of a field. You impart knowledge and skills to other people. It doesn't pay as well as the managers, but the projection for growth is better than the average. There is a certain amount of stress involved in it, but you are helping people achieve their potential. A lot of the growth of this field will be in adult education, because as our economy gets more high-tech, there's more need for people to acquire better skills, and those also include literacy skills, not just technical skills. For classroom teaching, generally a bachelor's degree is needed except in vocational subjects. Those who teach in an industrial setting, however, won't need that degree, although it might be useful for your credibility. Like the management sequel, it could be helpful for you to take on a small teaching task, for example, to train the new recruits who show up in your office, and therefore prove your skills at this task. Another way to learn this is to give a presentation at a meeting of your professional association. Some people acquire skill at this by tutoring people in their spare time. And here are the names of some important teaching occupations other than the K-12 and university teaching occupations that most readily come to mind. If you care very much about some subject, about some cause, then you might think about a career in advocacy. And these careers change the laws, or they advocate in the media, they try to shape public opinion. I aggregated the careers in this field and came up with an average of $66,000. Growth is above average. One of the problems with this career is that the results may be mixed. You may not be able to actually shape the opinion that you want to, and that can be frustrating if you care a great deal about the subject. There are many different ways to move into politics. I think, for example, of Tom DeLay, who became a very powerful figure in the House of Representatives. He had been an exterminator, and he got involved in politics because he was advocating for doing away with some of the regulations on exterminators. Other people go into politics from a background of leadership in their fields. Some people move into this field by getting a law degree. Another route is paralegal training. Most industry associations have some sort of agenda that they are promoting, and by becoming active in your industry association, you may be able to play an advocacy role and get experience in that role. Community organizations also have their own agendas, and by volunteering for a community organization, you may get the experience you need to make this move as a career. Here are the names of some occupations that involve advocacy, and you'll notice that a couple of them are media careers. One kind of knowledge that you've acquired is what the difference is between good work and bad work, and you may make a sequel career move that's involved with enforcing standards. In some standards enforcement careers, you play the role of a cop who protects the public by enforcing standards. Another work role is to work for a company to enhance or maintain the quality of its products or its services. This group of occupations makes a pretty decent income and has slightly above average growth projection. There may be stress in some of these careers in that you may be pressured to overlook faults in quality. You may also not like the fact that you have to deal with certain structured procedures in deciding what's good and what's bad, and you may find it difficult to deal with cases where you'd like to make an exception. In some of these occupations, particularly when it involves protecting the public, there's some sort of certification or licensure that's needed to prove that you have the knowledge of the standards for the career and that you understand the laws that enforce these standards. However, it's also possible to do this at a technician level if you're enforcing the quality standards within a company. As in some of the other sequel careers, it's possible to move into this by taking on a small task that involves quality control and proving that you understand the laws and procedures that involve quality control. You may also consider suggesting some way to improve the quality of the services or products where you work and get yourself put in charge of dealing with the issue of quality. Here's some standards enforcement occupations. Every industry is involved in communications in some way. It has to communicate internally, it may want to communicate externally about itself, and for that reason there's a need for writers and translators, in some cases speakers, in order to communicate about the industry or within the industry. The earnings in this group of occupation are decent but not outstanding, and the projected growth is about average. In this field you often need to meet deadlines, and you also have to be concerned about the accuracy of the information that you're transmitting. There's also a lot of competition in this field because a lot of people think they have the skills to do it well, and the fact is there are few formal requirements for entering this field. You may consider taking on a writing task where you work, for example starting a newsletter, or writing a report about a project that you're involved in. You may also write for a professional association or a community organization. Nowadays, a lot of communications is high-tech. For example, there's blogging, and that's another thing you may take up. Anybody can start a blog. You may want to start one for your organization or for your community or for your industry. These are the names of some occupations that involve communications, and this includes interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing. The sales sequel is another one you may consider if you've worked in an industry for a while. You've learned what the selling points are, where the buyers and sellers get together, and perhaps what persuasive techniques work best in your industry. The average earnings in this field may not look all that impressive. However, this includes a lot of fairly low-level sales occupations. In technical sales, the earnings can be quite high. In fact, I know someone who was a chiropractor who went into technical sales instead because he could earn a lot more. And the growth projected in this field, again, is less than average on the whole, but in some fields it can be pretty high. The work involves a lot of contact with people. This may be an advantage for you if you're extroverted. It could be a problem if you're introverted. There's some pressure in this field to meet quotas, and your earning may depend on the volume of sales. There are few formal requirements for moving into sales. However, licensure is required if there's investments or insurance being sold. Much of the time you learn by on-the-job training. You follow around someone who's working in sales and learn what techniques that person uses and what the procedures are. Another way to go into sales is simply to have experience of using something. I know someone who moved into sales because he had experience using a certain new technical product. He was one of the few people who knew how this product worked, and so he could help new users understand how to use it, and he knew what the selling points were. Here are some sales occupations, and you notice this can include intangible sales and also tangible objects. A somewhat related sequel career is moving into brokerage. These are the people who bring buyers and sellers together. And we're all familiar with real estate brokers, but there are many other kinds of sales where we need to bring buyers and sellers together. This provides the satisfaction of helping people achieve certain goals, but there's quite a lot of competition in this field, and the projected growth is a little bit below average. Some kinds of brokering do not require a great deal of formal requirements, but you may need to get insurance or be bonded so that your clients trust you. In some fields, such as real estate, there's a need for licensure. It may help to start as an agent for someone who's selling something. And again, this isn't just a matter of real estate. For example, there are agents who represent actors and other performers. And here are the names of some other brokerage occupations. I've covered some of the major sequel careers. However, there are many other fields in which it's possible to leverage your knowledge of an industry. For example, you might go into recruitment. The recruitment and agency sequel has to do with getting people hired, and you may work from either side of the desk. You may work as a recruiter or a headhunter helping companies hire people, or you may work at the other side of the desk where you're helping people get hired. New product development has become a sequel career in its own right. It's a very collaborative field because it brings together people from many different disciplines: engineers, marketers, writers, etc. These people work together to design the new product, understand what the market wants, bring it to the market, and sell it to the market. The entrepreneurial sequel overlaps with management to some extent because starting up a new business means managing it, at least from the outset. The recent recession saw an uptick in people acting as entrepreneurs, and it's partly because they were laid off from paid jobs, and so they had to work for themselves. The management analyst sequel is a little bit different from the management sequel in that you're helping managers rather than being a manager. You're helping these managers make their companies more competitive, and much of the time you're working as a hired gun. You may be self-employed or you may work for an agency that places you. Courts of law often need experts of various kinds to testify or to do investigations. This involves not only criminal cases but also civil cases. When scientific testimony is needed, the lawyers usually want someone who is a working professional, and so to play that role you wouldn't be changing your career. However, in certain non-scientific fields, you may be able to help lawyers build a case. For example, there are accountants who become specialists in finding cooked books. There are high-tech workers who become expert at retrieving information from computers that people think are erased. Here are still more sequel careers, for example in appraising, if you understand the value of things, and your knowledge of an industry can help people understand where the good investments are. You may understand the risks or the costs in an industry and be able to make a living by doing that. You may understand what the security threats are and what the ways are to take safeguards against those threats. You may have knowledge of how a business can recover from a disaster. And your experiences may help an organization with its purchasing because of your knowledge of good quality and of the marketplace. I haven't exhausted all the possible sequel careers you might go into. You may think of one that I haven't mentioned here. Perhaps you know some work role that's not being filled in your industry, or you may know another industry that can benefit from your knowledge of your industry. Another useful tool is myskillsmyfuture.org, which is a site that uses the information in the ONET database, and this can give you ideas about careers that can use your skills and by inference your knowledge. I would advise you to become well informed about the sequel career before you make a major commitment to it. Most of the information about careers that's in books and on the web is about entry-level jobs, and for you the career might be somewhat different coming from a background of industry experience. Therefore, I would suggest the way you can learn about the sequel career is more through experiential research. One way is to get an experimental job assignment in that role, and I mentioned several ways you could do this. For example, taking on a small managerial task, taking on a writing task. Another way is to moonlight in the career. Now you have to be careful that you don't let this impinge on your daytime job or compete with your daytime company. But it is a way to learn about the career and also to earn some extra income. Another way is to work as a volunteer in a community organization or a professional association. Now to make your sequel work and to make that move into that career, you're going to have to tune up your resume in a way that emphasizes the knowledge and skills that are appropriate for that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, a shift to a sequel career often involves skills that may not be at the center of your present career. For example, you may be working as a technician and then go into a career where you're writing about that career instead. And so you have to be able to play up the skills that are relevant to the new work role. As in any career move, it's important to tap into the hidden job market. That's where most of the hiring gets done. And that means networking with people in your field. Now, the fact that you've worked in that field for a long time should give you a lot of contacts that you can reach. Because you know the major players in your field and where the growth is in your field, this gives you an advantage in deciding where to make cold calls. In any midlife career change, there's always an issue of age discrimination. You have to be aware of this and take measures to counteract this. It helps to show a lot of energy and enthusiasm and to show that you're aware of the new advances that are being made in technology and means of communication in your field. There's a movement in career development now to look at everyone's career as a story, and here the concept of sequel career really fits in. You may think of your career as a continuing adventure, and if you're forced into a career change, as I have been in the past, you may think of this as a plot twist rather than as a tragic outcome. Here are some ways to get in contact with me. I have a web presence, I have a Facebook page, I have a Twitter feed, I also maintain a blog, and you can find out about all of these at Chatkin.com. Thank you for listening to this presentation.